Grace McKenna had learned to read weather the way some people read books, interpreting signs in the sky, the behavior of animals, the particular quality of wind that carried warnings from the high peaks. Today, every sign screamed danger. The November sky over Montana Territory had turned the color of old bruises, and the wind carried ice crystals that stung like needles. A major storm was coming, the kind that could bury a person in snow and cold so deep they wouldn't be found until spring thaw. She'd been checking her father's trapline, her trapline now. She reminded herself with the familiar ache of grief. Joseph McKenna had been one of the best trappers in Montana Territory, respected by settlers and indigenous peoples alike for his fairness and skill. When pneumonia had taken him 8 months ago, leaving 15-year-old Grace alone in the wilderness cabin he'd built, most folks assumed she'd give up and move to Fort Benton or Helena, but Grace was her father's daughter, stubborn, resourceful, and determined to honor his memory by continuing the work he'd started. She knew these mountains, knew how to trap and skin and survive. What she hadn't quite figured out yet was how to bear the crushing loneliness of being completely alone in one of the most isolated regions of the frontier. The storm hit faster than she'd anticipated. One moment she was following the trapline through the dense pine forest. The next, she was engulfed in white, the wind howling like something alive and angry. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the temperature plummeted so fast Grace could feel her fingers going numb inside her thick gloves. She knew these woods well enough to orient herself even in the whiteout, and she knew her best chance of survival wasn't trying to make it back to her cabin that was 5 miles away, far too dangerous in these conditions. Instead, she turned west toward an old line shack her father had built years ago as an emergency shelter. It was less than a mile away, crude but weatherproof, stocked with basic supplies for exactly this kind of situation. Grace pushed through the deepening snow, each step a battle against wind that seemed determined to knock her down. Ice formed on her eyelashes, and her breath came in gasps that burned her lungs. But she kept moving, counting steps, using the angle of the wind and the shapes of trees to navigate toward safety. When the dark outline of the line shack finally appeared through the white chaos, Grace felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made her stumble. She staggered toward the door, grabbed the handle, and pushed inside and froze. The line shack wasn't empty. A young man, no, a warrior, clearly indigenous from his features and the remnants of traditional clothing, sat in the corner, chained to the heavy support beam that held up the roof. His wrists were bound in iron shackles connected by a short length of chain, and his ankles were similarly restrained. He'd been beaten badly. His face was swollen, dried blood crusted on his split lip, and he held himself in a way that suggested broken or badly bruised ribs, but it was his eyes that caught Grace's attention. Despite the obvious pain and the desperate situation, they held no fear, only a fierce, unbroken pride and intelligence. They assessed her in an instant, calculating whether she represented threat or possibility. Grace quickly shut the door against the storm and took in the rest of the scene. The shack showed signs of recent occupation by multiple people. Empty whiskey bottles, cigarette butts, playing cards scattered on the makeshift table. The bounty hunters had been using this as a temporary prison, probably planning to wait out the storm before moving their captive. "Water," the warrior said, his English accented but clear. His voice was hoarse, suggesting he'd been without water for some time. "Please," Grace's training warred with her compassion. Her father had taught her to be cautious around strangers, to trust slowly. But he'd also taught her that every person deserved basic human dignity, regardless of who they were or where they came from. And this young man was clearly suffering. She pulled her canteen from her pack and approached carefully. The warrior watched her with that same intense assessment, neither pleading nor threatening, simply waiting to see what she would do. Grace knelt beside him and held the canteen to his cracked lips. He drank deeply, water spilling down his chin in his desperation, then pulled back and took several shuddering breaths. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You show kindness when you do not have to. This matters. What's your name?" Grace asked, settling back on her heels but not moving away. "And why are you chained here?" "I am called Runs with Wind. I am Crow." He paused, seeming to consider how much to tell her. "The men who chain me, they are bounty hunters. They say I kill white family near Fort Benton. They say there is money for bringing me in dead or alive. They prefer dead, less trouble. Did you? Kill the family? Grace asked directly, watching his face. No. The single word was firm, absolute. I was hunting, 2 days' ride from Fort Benton when killings happen. But I am Crow, and settlers need someone to blame. Bounty hunters do not care about truth. They care about money. Grace studied him, using every bit of her father's wisdom about reading people. Joseph McKenna had always said you could tell more from how someone held themselves in hardship than from 1,000 words in comfort. This young warrior, he couldn't be more than 19 or 20, held himself with dignity despite his desperate situation. His eyes met hers directly, not shifting or avoiding. And there was something in his voice, a ring of truth that Grace's instincts recognized. The hunters, Grace said. Where are they now? They go for supplies, maybe whiskey. They say Storm keep them away until tomorrow, maybe longer. Then they take me to Fort Benton, collect reward. His expression didn't change, but Grace heard what he didn't say. They would never reach Fort Benton alive. The bounty hunters would kill him somewhere along the trail and claim he'd tried to escape. The wind howled outside, shaking the small structure. Snow was already piling against the door. Grace looked at the chains, at the warrior who was watching her with careful hope, at the situation that had trapped them both in this small space. She thought about her father, about the stories he'd told of his friendship with various tribal peoples, about his belief that most conflicts came from fear and misunderstanding, rather than genuine evil. She thought about the bounty hunters who would return, men who valued money over truth, and would think nothing of murdering an innocent person if it was profitable. And she thought about the kind of person she wanted to be, someone who chose comfort over conscience, or someone who did what was right, even when it was hard and dangerous. Grace made her decision. She pulled her lock-picking tools from her pack, skills her father had taught her, saying a trapper needed to be able to open any lock on any trap. I'm going to get you out of those chains, she said quietly. And then we're both going to survive this storm and figure out how to prove your innocence. Runs with Wind's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion breaking through his carefully controlled expression. You do not know me. You do not know if I tell truth, why you take this risk. Because my father taught me to judge people by what I see in them, not by what others say about them. And what I see in you isn't a murderer. It's someone who's been treated unjustly and who deserves a chance to prove his innocence. Grace positioned her tools at the first lock. Also, if the bounty hunters come back and find us both here, they're not going to leave witnesses. So helping you is also helping me. The locks were crude but effective, designed for restraint rather than security. Grace worked carefully, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. The first wrist shackle clicked open after several tense minutes. Then the second. Then the ankle restraints. Runs with Wind rubbed his wrists where the iron had cut into his skin, and Grace saw the raw, infected wounds there. She pulled medical supplies from her pack, another lesson from her father, always carry what you need to survive, and began cleaning the wounds. The hunters, she said as she worked. How many? What weapons? 4 men. All have rifles, pistols. They are experienced, dangerous. They will not accept losing their prize. They will hunt us. Then we need to move before they can return. This storm will last at least through tonight, maybe into tomorrow. That gives us a window. Grace finished bandaging his wrists and sat back. Can you ride? Travel in this weather? I can do what I must. He looked at her with something like wonder. You are very young to have such courage. I'm old enough to know right from wrong. That's all the age I need. Grace moved to the small cache of supplies her father had stored in the shack, dried meat, hardtack, a spare blanket. There's a cave system about 3 miles north of here. Hidden entrance, hard to find if you don't know where to look. My father showed it to me years ago. We can shelter there while the storm passes, then figure out our next move. 3 miles in this storm will be dangerous. Staying here when those hunters return will be more dangerous. Runs with Wind nodded slowly, accepting her logic. I will follow where you lead. You have earned my trust. They prepared quickly, gathering what supplies they could carry. Grace gave Runs with Wind her spare coat and gloves. He was dressed for warmer weather, and hypothermia would kill him as surely as the bounty hunter's bullets. She also gave him her father's old knife, a weapon and a tool he might need. As they prepared to leave, the warrior touched her shoulder gently. "What is your name?" "You know mine, but I do not know how to thank you properly." Grace McKenna." "Grace." He repeated it carefully, giving it the weight of something sacred. "This word means gift from Creator, yes? It is good name for you. You are gift to me today. Gift of life, of hope, of belief that not all white people have hatred in their hearts." Grace felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she pushed it aside. "Save your thanks for when we're both safe. Right now we need to move." They pushed out into the storm, and Grace immediately understood how dangerous this journey would be. The wind had intensified, and the snow was falling so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. But she knew these mountains, had walked these trails countless times with her father, and she trusted her sense of direction. The journey that should have taken less than an hour stretched into 3 brutal hours of fighting through drifts, navigating by instinct and memory, and struggling to keep moving when exhaustion threatened to overcome them both. Runs with Wind, despite his injuries and weakened state, kept pace with her, never complaining, simply enduring with the same fierce determination she saw in his eyes. Finally, Grace found the rock formation she was looking for. A cluster of boulders arranged in a way that looked natural, but concealed a narrow entrance to a cave system. She led Runs with Wind inside, and they both collapsed in the relative warmth and shelter, gasping for breath, shaking with cold and exertion. "We made it," Grace said when she could finally speak. "We're safe, at least for now." But even as she said it, she wondered if safe was the right word. They were sheltered from the storm, yes, but the bounty hunters would be looking for them. And she had just made herself an accomplice to an escaped fugitive. Her act of mercy had likely made her a target, and she had no idea what consequences would follow. As she built a small fire and they huddled close to its warmth, Runs with Wind spoke quietly. "I will remember this day for rest of my life. What you do, you risk everything to help stranger, to choose what is right over what is easy. This is true courage. This is what makes you warrior in your heart. I just did what anyone should do. No, most people do not. Most people choose safety, choose to look away, choose to believe what is comfortable instead of what is true. You are different, special." He looked at her with profound respect. "I owe you life debt. In my people's way, this means I am bound to you, to protect you, to honor you, for as long as I breathe. You saved me, so I will stand between you and any danger. This I swear." Grace didn't fully understand the weight of what he was promising, but she felt the solemnity of it. "I don't need you to owe me anything. I just need you to survive long enough to clear your name. I will do both." "And Grace?" He waited until she met his eyes. "What you do today, it will matter more than you know. Sometimes one person's courage ripples out, touches many lives, changes many hearts. You start something today that is bigger than just you and me." Grace didn't know how prophetic those words would be. She didn't know that her choice to free a captive warrior would set in motion events that would bring 300 riders to her door, would forge alliances between peoples who had been enemies, would prove that mercy was stronger than hatred, but she would learn. And it would all begin with the storm raging outside and the quiet promise of protection exchanged between 2 young people who had both lost so much, but who had just found something precious, an ally, a friend, and living proof that courage could bridge any divide. Grace woke to absolute silence. The storm had passed during the night, and the first thing she noticed was how unnaturally quiet the world had become, that particular hush that came after heavy snowfall, when sound itself seemed muffled by the white blanket covering everything. The second thing she noticed was that Runs with Wind was already awake, sitting near the cave entrance, watching the world outside with alert intensity. He turned when he heard her stir. "The hunters," he said quietly, "they will come today. They will find the line shack empty. We'll see our tracks in the snow before the storm buried them completely. They will know someone helped me escape." Grace joined him at the cave entrance, looking out at a landscape transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, beautiful in its harshness. But that beauty was deceptive. This snow had also created a trap. Any movement they made now would leave clear tracks, making them easy to follow. "Your cabin," Runs with Wind continued. "They will go there. Look for you, look for answers. If you return, they will find you." He was right, and Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The bounty hunters would assume she'd helped their prisoner escape, And men like that, men who valued money over truth, wouldn't hesitate to hurt or kill a witness who could contradict their story about Runs with Wind being a murderer. So what do we do? Grace asked. We can't stay in this cave forever. We have maybe 2 days of supplies. I know place, Runs with Wind said thoughtfully. My people's winter camp in Valley 3 days north. They would welcome you, protect you. There is Chief Manywounds. He is wise man, respected by both Crow and White leaders. He might help prove my innocence. 3 days through winter mountains with bounty hunters looking for us. Grace calculated the odds. That's assuming we don't run into army patrols, other hunters, or get caught in another storm. Yes, it is dangerous. But staying here is also dangerous. He looked at her seriously. Grace, you give me freedom. But this freedom put you in danger too. I am sorry for this. If you want, I go alone. You return to cabin. Say you never see me. Say you were trapped in storm elsewhere. Maybe they believe you. Grace considered it for approximately 3 seconds. No, they won't believe me. The hunters will have found signs of the lockpicking, will know someone helped you. And even if they did believe me, I'm not going to let you travel injured and alone through winter mountains. We started this together, and we'll finish it together. A smile ghosted across Runs with Wind's face, transforming his serious expression. You are a stubborn person, Grace McKenna. This is good quality for survival in Montana. They spent the morning preparing, rationing their limited supplies and planning the safest route north. Runs with Wind knew the territory as well as Grace did. And together, they plotted a path that would keep them off obvious trails, while still allowing them to make reasonable time. As they prepared to leave, Grace made one last check of their supplies and realized something was missing. My father's rifle, she said, stomach sinking. I left it in the line shack. I only had my pistol when the storm hit. That is problem, Runs with Wind acknowledged. 4 men with rifles and we have only 1 pistol. We need more weapons. There's a trading post, Grace said slowly. Fort Shaw, about 10 miles west of here. Run by a man named Samuel Bridger. He knew my father might help us. We could get supplies, weapons, maybe even horses. Right now we're on foot, which makes everything harder. But 10 miles west, and then 3 days north, that is much longer journey. Much more exposure to danger. But with proper supplies and horses, we'd have much better chance of making it to your people's camp. Grace made the decision. We go to Fort Shaw first. If Bridger won't help us, at least we tried. They set out, moving carefully through the snow-covered forest. Every sound seemed magnified, the crunch of snow under their boots, the occasional crack of an ice-laden branch breaking under its burden. They saw signs of wildlife, elk tracks, the distinctive marks of a mountain lion, but no human presence. That changed 2 hours into their journey. Runs with Wind suddenly grabbed Grace's arm and pulled her behind a cluster of boulders, his hand over her mouth in a gesture of silence. She heard what he'd heard, voices carried on the still air, coming from somewhere ahead of them on the trail. They waited, hardly breathing, as 4 men came into view. The bounty hunters. Grace recognized them from her father's descriptions. Rough men who operated on the edges of the law, who took jobs that more scrupulous people wouldn't touch. The leader was a big man with a scarred face and dead eyes. His name was Gideon Thorne, and Joseph McKenna had once run him off their property for trying to cheat on a fur trade. Tracks went cold at the line shack, one of them was saying. But somebody picked those locks, and the McKenna girl's cabin is only 5 miles south. Then that's where we go, Thorne replied, his voice flat and emotionless. Girl lives alone up here. Probably thinks she's some kind of frontier woman. She helped the Indian escape. We make her tell us where they went. Simple. And if she won't talk? Another hunter asked. Thorne's answering laugh was chilling. Everyone talks eventually. And if she doesn't, well, we can always make it look like the Crow raided her cabin, killed her in revenge for something. So either way, we find our prisoner and collect our money. Grace felt Runs with Wind tense beside her, felt her own fear morphing into anger. These men were planning to hurt her, to kill her if necessary, all for money. All because she'd chosen to help an innocent person, instead of letting him die in chains. The hunters moved on, heading south toward Grace's cabin. She and Runs with Wind stayed frozen behind the boulders for a full 10 minutes after the voices faded, making sure they were truly alone. They will reach your cabin by afternoon, Runs with Wind said quietly. When they find it empty, they will search, will look for signs of where you go. This gives us maybe 1 day before they find our trail to Fort Shaw. Then we need to move fast. Grace stood, brushing snow from her clothes. And we need to hope Samuel Bridger is as good a friend to my father's memory as he always claimed to be. The journey to Fort Shaw took the rest of the day. They moved as quickly as conditions allowed, always alert for sounds of pursuit. By the time the trading post came into view, a cluster of sturdy log buildings in a small clearing, the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Grace approached cautiously. Fort Shaw wasn't a military installation, despite its name. It was a private trading post and way station, one of the few places in this remote region where trappers, traders, and occasional travelers could get supplies and information. Samuel Bridger ran it with his wife Martha, and Grace had known them since childhood, but would they help her now when helping meant standing against bounty hunters and possibly the law itself? Grace made runs with wind, wait in the trees while she approached alone. If Bridger reacted badly, at least one of them might escape. She knocked on the main building's door, her heart pounding. Samuel Bridger opened the door, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. His expression went from welcoming to shocked when he saw her. "Grace, child, we heard your cabin was attacked, that you were missing or—" He stopped, taking in her disheveled appearance, the fear in her eyes. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Mr. Bridger, I need help. And I need you to listen to the whole story before you make any decisions." Grace glanced back at the forest. "Can I come in? And I have someone with me. Someone who needs help too." Bridger's eyes followed her gaze, and Grace saw him stiffen slightly when Runs with Wind emerged from the trees. But to his credit, Bridger didn't reach for a weapon or slam the door. Instead, he stepped back and gestured them both inside. "Martha," he called to his wife, "we have company, and they look like they could use some hot food and medical attention." Over the next hour, as they sat by the fire with food and warmth, Grace told the whole story. Finding Runs with Wind in the lion shack, freeing him, the bounty hunter's plans, the journey here. She watched Bridger's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. When she finished, there was a long silence. Martha Bridger, a practical woman who'd raised 4 children on the frontier, spoke first. "That Gideon Thorne is a snake," she said bluntly. "I've heard stories about him and his gang. They care more about reward money than truth or justice. If this young man says he's innocent, I'm inclined to believe him, especially since their evidence seems to be nothing more than him being in the territory when the murders happened. But helping them puts us at risk," Bridger said slowly, "not with hostility, but with the careful consideration of a man who'd survived decades on the frontier by thinking through consequences. Thorne won't just let this go. If he finds out we helped, then we make sure he doesn't find out," Martha replied firmly. "Sam, you knew Joe McKenna for 15 years. You know what he'd do in this situation. He'd help because it was the right thing to do." Bridger looked at Runs with Wind, really looked at him for the first time. "You swear you didn't kill that family?" "I swear on everything sacred to my people," Runs with Wind replied steadily. "I am not murderer. I hunt only for food, fight only when I must defend. I do not kill innocent people." Another silence, then Bridger nodded. "All right, I'll help. But we need to be smart about this. Thorne and his gang will come here eventually, looking for information. We need to send them in the wrong direction. Give you 2 time to reach the Crow camp and get Chief Many Wounds to vouch for you." "You know Many Wounds?" Grace asked, surprised. "I've traded with the Crow for 20 years. Many Wounds is a good man, fair and honorable. If he says you're innocent," Bridger looked at Runs with Wind, "the army will listen. He's got credibility with the military commanders at Fort Benton." They spent the evening planning. Bridger would provide horses, supplies, weapons, and directions to the Crow winter camp. In exchange, Grace and Runs with Wind would follow a specific route that would leave minimal tracks and would take them through territory Thorne was unlikely to search. "There's one more thing," Bridger said as they prepared to leave the next morning. "Your father, Grace, he left something with me before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him and you needed help, I should give it to you." He retrieved a leather satchel from a locked chest. Inside were papers, deeds, letters, and most importantly, a document signed by several army officers and tribal leaders testifying to Joseph McKenna's character and his role as a trusted intermediary between white settlers and indigenous peoples. "Your father was more than just a trapper," Bridger explained. "He was a peacemaker, someone both sides trusted. These documents establish you as his heir, give you some of his credibility. If you can make it to Many Wounds, show him these. He'll understand you're continuing your father's work. Grace felt tears sting her eyes as she looked at her father's careful handwriting, saw the signatures of respected leaders attesting to his integrity. He'd been preparing for this possibility, had been building bridges even while knowing he might not live to see them completed. "Thank you," she said to Bridger, "for believing us, for helping." "Thank your father," Bridger replied. "He taught me that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy and everyone's watching. It's what they do when it's hard and no one would know. You're living up to that standard, child. He'd be proud." They left Fort Shore at dawn, riding the horses Bridger provided, carrying proper supplies and her father's legacy in the satchel. As they headed north into the mountains, Grace felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The bounty hunters were still hunting them, and 3 days of winter travel lay ahead. But they had resources now and a clear goal, and the testimony of her father's good work to support their case. Runs with Wind rode beside her, and as the sun climbed higher, he spoke quietly. "I understand now why you helped me. Your father teach you well, not just with words but with actions. You carry his spirit forward." "I'm trying," Grace replied, "though I'm scared most of the time. Courage is not absence of fear. It is doing right thing even when you are afraid. You have this courage. It is rare gift." That night they made camp in a sheltered valley, keeping their fire small and taking turns on watch. Grace was on second watch, sitting wrapped in blankets and watching the stars, when Runs with Wind spoke from where he lay. "When we reach my people, there will be questions. Why white girl travel with Crow warrior? What relationship we have? You should know. In my people's way, because you saved my life, because I owe you life debt, you are considered part of my family now. My sisters will be your sisters. My people's elders will hear your voice as they hear mine. You will have protection, honor, place among us. I don't want to cause problems. You will not cause problems. You will bring solution. Bridge between peoples like your father." He raised himself on one elbow, his face serious in the firelight. "Grace, what you do. Choose honor over safety. Choose to help even when it cost you everything. This is beginning of something important, not just for you and me, but for many people. You will see." Grace didn't fully understand what he meant, but she felt the weight of it. Tomorrow they would continue north. In 2 more days they would reach the Crow camp. And then they would discover whether her choice to protect a captive warrior would lead to salvation or disaster. But sitting there under the vast Montana stars, with Runs with Wind's grateful presence nearby and her father's legacy in the satchel beside her, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months since her father died. Purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone who mattered, someone who made a difference, someone who lived up to the name her father had given her. Grace. A gift. And she intended to use that gift to build bridges, to seek justice, to prove that courage and compassion could triumph over hatred and greed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight she was ready to face them. The last 2 days of travel were brutal but uneventful. Grace and Runs with Wind pushed hard, traveling from before dawn until after dark, stopping only when absolutely necessary. The Montana winter showed no mercy. Temperatures dropped well below freezing at night, and during the day the sun's glare off snow was blinding. But they made good progress, and more importantly, they saw no signs of pursuit. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Runs with Wind suddenly straightened in his saddle, his expression transforming. "We are close. I smell smoke from cook fires. My people are near." Within an hour, they crested a ridge and looked down into a protected valley. Grace's breath caught at the sight. Perhaps 50 tipis were arranged in careful patterns along a frozen river, smoke rising from each one into the clear blue sky. People moved through the camp, women working on hides, children playing in the snow, men tending horses in a makeshift corral. It looked peaceful, organized, and somehow more permanent than Grace had expected. But as they descended into the valley, Grace noticed something that made her nervous. Warriors were emerging from the teepees, gathering silently, watching their approach with expressions she couldn't read. Within minutes, what seemed like the entire camp had assembled, all eyes focused on the approaching riders. Runs with Wind seemed to sense her anxiety. Do not fear. They gather because I return when they thought I was dead or captured, and they are curious about white girl who rides with me. Let me speak first, explain everything. They rode into the center of camp, and Runs with Wind dismounted, speaking rapidly in Crow. Grace caught perhaps one word in 10, but she understood the gist from his gestures. He was telling them about his capture, about Grace finding and freeing him, about the bounty hunters and their journey here. An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd, tall despite his years, with a face that showed both wisdom and old battle scars. This had to be Chief Many Wounds, the leader Bridger had spoken of with such respect. He spoke to Runs with Wind, asking questions, his tone serious but not hostile. Then his eyes moved to Grace, and she felt the weight of his assessment. Runs with Wind gestured for Grace to dismount and approach. Her legs trembled slightly as she walked forward, but she kept her head up and her shoulders straight. Her father had taught her that showing respect didn't mean showing weakness. Chief Many Wounds, she said clearly. I am Grace McKenna, daughter of Joseph McKenna, who traded with your people for 15 years. I come seeking justice and offering friendship. There was a moment of silence. Then Many Wounds smiled, a genuine expression that softened his stern features. I remember your father, he said in heavily accented but clear English. Good man, fair man. He treat Crow people with respect, when most whites treat us like animals or obstacles. His death was great loss. He studied her carefully. You have his eyes. His courage too, I think. Thank you, sir. I'm trying to honor his memory. Runs with Wind tells remarkable story, that you find him chained, beaten, that you free him when you could ignore him, save yourself trouble, that you protect him from hunters even though this put you in great danger. Many Wounds paused. This is truth. Yes, sir. Every word. Why? You do not know him. In eyes of many of your people, he is enemy. Why you risk everything for stranger? Grace thought about how to answer, about all the complex reasons that had led to her decision. But in the end, she gave the simple truth. Because it was the right thing to do. Because he was a human being suffering unjustly, and I had the power to help. My father taught me that we're not defined by what tribe we belong to, or what language we speak. We're defined by our choices, especially the hard ones. Many Wounds nodded slowly, and Grace saw approval in his eyes. He spoke in Crow to the assembled people, and though Grace didn't understand the words, she understood the tone. It was a declaration of welcome, of acceptance. People began to disperse, returning to their tasks, though many cast curious glances back at her. You are welcome in our camp, Grace McKenna, Many Wounds said. Tonight we hold council. You tell your story to elders, show papers your father left. We discuss how to prove Runs with Wind's innocence, and how to protect you both from those who hunt you. But now you rest. You have traveled far, and you look ready to fall over. He was right. Now that the adrenaline of arrival was fading, Grace felt exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. An elderly woman approached, speaking gently in Crow and gesturing toward one of the teepees. Runs with Wind translated. Grandmother Blue Dawn offers hospitality. She will provide food, place to rest, clean clothes. You accept? Gratefully, Grace replied. The next few hours passed in a blur of new experiences. Blue Dawn treated Grace with maternal kindness, providing warm stew, helping her wash away days of trail dirt, and offering clean clothing, a beautiful dress of soft leather decorated with intricate beadwork. As Grace dressed, she caught sight of herself in a small mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. She looked like she belonged here, which was both strange and oddly comforting. As evening approached, Blue Dawn led Grace to a large teepee at the center of camp, clearly the council lodge. Inside, a fire burned in the center, its smoke rising through the opening at the top. The elders were already assembled, perhaps 15 men and women of various ages, all watching Grace with careful attention as she entered. Many Wounds gestured for her to sit beside Runs with Wind, and once she was settled, he spoke to the council in Crow, then switched to English for Grace's benefit. We gathered to hear full story, to decide what must be done. Grace McKenna, daughter of Joseph McKenna, who was friend to our people, tell us everything. Leave nothing out. Grace took a deep breath and began. She told them about finding Runs with Wind chained in the line shack, about the bounty hunter's plans, about her decision to free him despite the risks. She told them about the journey through the storm, the close call with Thorne's gang, the help Samuel Bridger had provided, and she told them about the murders Runs with Wind was accused of, and why she believed he was innocent. When she finished, she pulled out the satchel Bridger had given her, showing them her father's papers, the testimonials from army officers and tribal leaders, the documentation of his work as a peaceful intermediary, and most importantly, a letter he'd written to Many Wounds that Grace hadn't known existed. The chief read it carefully, and Grace saw his expression soften. "Your father wrote this 2 weeks before he died. He speaks of you, of how he teach you his ways, of his hope that you continue his work of building understanding between peoples. He says," Many Wounds paused, his voice thick with emotion, "he says that you are his greatest achievement and that you have courage and wisdom beyond your years. He asks that if anything happens to him, Crow people watch over you as they would their own daughter." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. Her father had been preparing for his death, had been trying to ensure she would be protected and supported even after he was gone. The love in that gesture overwhelmed her. "I did not know of this letter until now," Many Wounds continued. "If I had known earlier that Joseph's daughter was living alone in mountains, I would have sent warriors to check on you, to offer help. This is my failure, and I am sorry." "You didn't know," Grace managed to say, "and I'm here now." "That's what matters." One of the other elders spoke, a woman with grey braids and sharp eyes. Runs with Wind translated quietly. "She asks what you want from us. You help one of our people, you are welcomed here, but what is it you seek?" "I seek justice," Grace replied firmly. "Not revenge, not violence, but truth. Runs with Wind is innocent of the murders he's accused of. Someone else killed that family, and that person is walking free while Runs with Wind is hunted. I want to help prove his innocence. And I want to prevent more injustice, because if Thorn and his gang can profit from false accusations, they'll do it again to someone else." The elders conferred among themselves, voices rising and falling in discussion. Finally, Many Wounds spoke again. "This is what we will do. Tomorrow I send riders to Fort Benton, with message for Army Commander Major Whitfield. I know this man, he is stern but fair. I tell him Runs with Wind is here under our protection, and that he is innocent. I invite Major to come to our camp, hear evidence, hear truth. If he agrees, we hold proper hearing, with witnesses and testimony." "And if he doesn't agree?" Grace asked. "If he sends soldiers to arrest Runs with Wind instead, then we will face that when it comes. But I do not think he will. Whitfield knows me, knows I speak truth. He will listen." Many Wounds looked at Grace seriously. "But you must understand, this process may take weeks. So until then, you stay here under our protection. You cannot return to your cabin. Bounty hunters will be watching it. This is your home now for as long as you need it." That night, as Grace lay in Blue Dawn's teepee, wrapped in warm furs and listening to the sounds of the camp settling for the night, she reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her here. 4 days ago, she'd been alone in a line shack during a storm. Now she was living among the Crow, protected by warriors, working to prove an innocent man's innocence while being hunted by dangerous men. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Grace felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time since her father died, she wasn't alone. She had purpose, community, and the knowledge that she was doing something that mattered. 3 days passed in a strange routine. Grace learned more about Crow life, helping with daily tasks, picking up more of the language, beginning to understand the complex social structures and traditions that governed the camp. The people treated her with growing warmth, especially after word spread about the letter her father had written to Many Wounds. Runs with Wind became her constant companion and translator, explaining customs and helping her navigate this new world. His ribs healed quickly, and his gratitude toward Grace never wavered. "You gave me life," he told her one evening as they worked together preparing hides, "not just by freeing me from chains, but by believing in me when most would not. This debt can never be repaid, but I will spend my life trying." "You don't owe me anything," Grace insisted. But she was beginning to understand that in Crow culture, such debts were sacred bonds, not burdens. On the 4th day, scouts brought news that made everyone tense. A large group of riders was approaching the camp from the south. Many riders, not soldiers in formation, but something else, something unprecedented. The entire camp assembled at the edge of the valley, watching as the riders came into view. Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. There weren't just many riders, there were hundreds. She counted quickly, her mind refusing to accept what she was seeing. 200! 300! It was hard to tell because they kept coming, an endless stream of mounted warriors from multiple tribes, all converging on the Crow camp. "What is this?" Grace whispered to Runs with Wind. "Why are so many warriors coming here?" His face showed the same shock she felt. "I do not know. This has never happened before." Many Wounds strode forward, his expression grave but not alarmed, to greet the leaders of the approaching host. Grace recognized some of the tribal identifications from her father's teachings: Blackfeet, Shoshone, Northern Cheyenne, even some Lakota. Tribes that were traditionally rivals or even enemies, now riding together in what looked like a massive alliance. The leader of the group dismounted, a tall Blackfeet warrior with eagle feathers in his hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He spoke to Many Wounds in a mixture of Crow and sign language, and gradually Grace began to understand what was happening. Word had spread. The story of the white girl who freed a captive Crow warrior, who sacrificed everything to protect him from unjust bounty hunters, had traveled through the tribal networks faster than any rider could have carried it. And it had done something remarkable. It had reminded people that not all whites were enemies, that courage and honor existed across all divides, that individual acts of conscience mattered. The Blackfeet leader, his name was Lone Bear, turned to address the assembled crowd, and Runs with Wind translated in real time for Grace. He says that for too long, our peoples have suffered from lies told about us, from being judged by actions of others rather than our own deeds. He says Grace McKenna shows us what is possible when one person chooses honor over fear, when she sees injustice and acts to stop it even at great cost to herself. He says this reminds him that there are still good people among the whites, just as there are good people among all tribes. Lone Bear continued, his voice carrying across the valley. He says that his people, and all the peoples represented here, have come to stand with Grace McKenna and Runs with Wind, to say that we honor courage wherever we find it, to show the soldiers and bounty hunters that some things are sacred, that justice matters, that truth matters, that one person's brave choice matters. Grace felt her knees weaken. 300 warriors from multiple tribes, many of whom were traditional rivals, had gathered because of her choice to free one captive man. It was overwhelming, humbling, and terrifying all at once. Many Wounds spoke then, his voice full of emotion. This is historic moment. Never before have so many peoples gathered in peace, in common purpose. Grace McKenna's courage has built bridge that many thought impossible. Tonight we feast together. Tomorrow we send delegation to Fort Benton, not to threaten but to demand justice, to say that we will not accept innocent people being hunted for profit, that we will stand for truth even when truth is uncomfortable. As the camp erupted in activity, people preparing for the massive gathering, setting up additional lodges, beginning to prepare food for hundreds of guests, Grace found herself surrounded by warriors and elders from different tribes, all wanting to meet her, to speak with her, to thank her for reminding them that individuals could make a difference. An elderly Shoshone woman touched Grace's face gently and spoke through an interpreter. "Your father would be proud. You carry his legacy forward in ways even he could not have imagined. You are bridge builder, peacemaker. This is sacred calling." That night, the feast was unlike anything Grace had ever witnessed. Hundreds of people from different tribes gathered around massive fires, sharing food and stories, making music and celebrating not just Grace's actions, but the possibility of unity and understanding. There were still tensions. Centuries of rivalry and conflict didn't disappear in one night, but there was also hope, and that was something precious. Runs with Wind found Grace sitting slightly apart from the celebration, overwhelmed by the scale of what was happening. He sat beside her, and for a moment they just watched the incredible scene before them. "I told you," he said quietly. "I told you that what you did would matter more than you knew. One person's courage ripples out, touches many lives, changes many hearts. You see now." "I never wanted this," Grace said softly. "I just wanted to help you. I didn't think about all of this. That is what makes it powerful. You act from heart, from conscience, with no thought of reward or recognition. That is true courage. That is what inspires others." He paused. "Grace, you understand what tomorrow brings. when we go to Fort Benton with 300 warriors standing witness. We demand justice. We demand that the truth be heard. Yes, and we show army, show settlers, show everyone that indigenous peoples are not savages to be hunted and killed for profit, that we are nations with honor, with laws, with the same desire for justice that any people have. Your action, freeing me, protecting me, it gave us moral authority. It showed that sometimes a white person can be more just than the system that governs them. That is powerful message. The next morning, a delegation was formed, many wounds. Lone Bear, representatives from each tribe, Runs with Wind and Grace. They would ride to Fort Benton under a peace flag, accompanied by 300 warriors as witnesses and protection. It was both a petition for justice and a demonstration of strength, a message that indigenous peoples could unite when necessary, that they demanded to be treated with dignity and fairness. Major Whitfield, the army commander at Fort Benton, met them outside the fort with a full company of soldiers. Grace could see the shock on his face as he took in the size of the delegation, the unity of traditional rivals, the peaceful but determined nature of the gathering. Many wounds spoke, with Runs with Wind translating to ensure perfect understanding. He told the full story, the murders, the false accusations, the bounty hunter's brutal treatment of an innocent man, and Grace's intervention. He produced witnesses who had been near Fort Benton when the murders occurred, and who could testify that Runs with Wind was 2 days' ride away at the time. He showed letters from respected traders like Samuel Bridger attesting to Runs with Wind's character. And then Grace spoke, her voice clear and firm despite her nervousness. Major Whitfield, my father taught me that justice isn't about convenience or profit. It's about truth. Runs with Wind is innocent of these murders. The bounty hunters who captured him didn't care about truth. They cared about reward money. If we allow innocent people to be hunted and killed for profit, we're not civilized. We're just pretending to be. She pulled out her father's papers, showing Whitfield the testimonials from army officers who had worked with Joseph McKenna, establishing her credibility and her father's legacy. Whitfield examined everything carefully, his expression grave. Finally, he spoke. This is a serious accusation against Gideon Thorne and his associates. If what you say is true, they've committed kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. But I need more than testimony. I need evidence. Then investigate, Many Wounds said firmly. Send your soldiers to find real killers instead of accepting easy answers. We will wait. We will give you time to do proper investigation. But we will not allow innocent man to be hunted while you take your time. Runs with Wind stays under our protection until truth is proven. And the girl? Whitfield asked, looking at Grace. Thorne claims she's an accomplice to an escape. Technically, that makes her a criminal. Technically, Grace replied, her voice steady, I prevented a miscarriage of justice. If your legal system says that's a crime, then your system needs to be changed. There was a tense silence, then Whitfield did something unexpected. He smiled slightly. You sound like your father. He said something very similar to me once, when he thought the army was being unfair in our dealings with the tribes. He looked at the assembled warriors, at Grace at Runs with Wind, and made his decision. I'll investigate properly, and until that investigation is complete, I'm declaring a temporary truce. Runs with Wind is not to be apprehended. Miss McKenna is not to be charged, and no bounty hunters are to pursue either of them. I'll send word to the territorial marshal, and we'll get to the bottom of this. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was justice beginning to work. The investigation took 3 weeks, during which Grace stayed in the Crow camp, helping with daily life and slowly learning to speak the language more fluently. She discovered she had a talent for mediation, helping resolve small disputes, explaining white customs to indigenous people and indigenous customs to the occasional white trader who visited. The investigation results, when they came, were damning. Whitfield's soldiers had found the real killers, a gang of outlaws who had been using the murders as cover for their own crimes. They'd killed the family during a robbery, and when suspicion had fallen on a nearby Crow warrior, they'd been happy to let him take the blame. Gideon Thorne had known the truth, but had seen an opportunity for easy money in capturing Runs with Wind and collecting the bounty. Thorne and his gang were arrested. The real killers were brought to justice, and Runs with Wind was officially cleared of all charges, but the story didn't end there. Word of what had happened, of Grace's courage, of the unprecedented gathering of tribes in support of justice. They of the army actually investigating properly, instead of accepting easy answers, spread throughout Montana Territory and beyond. Newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly Grace McKenna was famous, the girl who united the tribes, as one headline proclaimed. Grace found the attention uncomfortable, but she understood its value. Her story was being used to challenge stereotypes, to show that indigenous peoples were capable of remarkable unity and restraint, to prove that individual acts of courage could make systemic change possible. 6 months after that night in the line shack, Grace stood outside her rebuilt cabin, reconstructed with the help of both Crow warriors and white neighbors who had been inspired by her example. She was no longer alone in the world. She had family now, not just Blue Dawn and the Crow people who had adopted her, but a network of allies spanning multiple tribes and cultures. Runs with Wind visited often, bringing news from the tribal councils and updates on the growing peace movement that had emerged from that winter's events. "You started something," he told her. "People are talking now, trying to find solutions instead of just fighting. It is slow, it is hard, but it is happening." "We started something," Grace corrected. "I freed you, yes. But you had the courage to trust me, to bring your people together, to stand for justice instead of revenge. This is both our legacy." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting them in shades of gold and crimson, Grace reflected on how much her life had changed. She had lost her father, yes, but she had gained a purpose. She had protected a captive warrior from hunters. And that night, 300 riders had stood outside her cabin, not as enemies, but as allies, as family, as living proof that courage and compassion could bridge any divide. The future was still uncertain. Tensions remained. The conflicts that had torn apart the frontier wouldn't disappear overnight. But Grace had learned something important. Change began with individuals making hard choices, with people choosing honor over convenience, with bridges built one brave act at a time. She had been her father's daughter, honoring his legacy, but now she was also something more, a bridge builder in her own right, a voice for justice, a living reminder that one person's choice to stand for what's right could indeed change the world. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Grace McKenna smiled. She had found her place, her purpose, her home, not in isolation but in community, not through fear but through courage, not by accepting injustice but by standing against it. The girl who had protected a captive warrior had become something greater, a symbol of hope, a builder of bridges, and proof that mercy was stronger than hatred, truth more powerful than lies, and courage the most contagious force in the world.